would like to tell you a story. Years ago, I was conducting research on men's narrative accounts of their experiences with prostate cancer. And during that time, I ran across one man. Actually, he was the only man in my survey, in my participant pool, who was unmarried. And during that time, as he told me his story, he disclosed to me that he had not told his long term girlfriend how sick he was. This seems like an interesting opportunity for us to talk about a real world event in the terms of one of the theories that comes out of interpersonal and family communication. That is communication privacy management theory, or CPMT for short. It is the brainchild of a scholar named Sandra Petronio, who, if I recall correctly, is still on the faculty at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, IUPUI. Yes. Petronio is concerned about why and how we deal with private information. So, in a nutshell, what she argues is that we use privacy boundaries or as barriers to restrict the flow of information, and that we tend to view private information as a possession, as something that we own. Now, that may or may not always be the case, but let's work from those assumptions to see what Petronio wants to try to understand about how we deal with private information. She believes that people believe that they have a right to their own information and to control that information. In the case of this particular prostate cancer survivor, he was disclosing that he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Now, that might pose some ethical questions for you in that case because he is withholding the kind of personal significant information that you might want to know. But to buy into privacy management theory is to accept the notion that that information is his, and it's his to do with whatever he wants. And the whatever he wants takes the form of privacy rules. We all have privacy rules that we create to determine what kinds of information we share with whom. This man made a decision that he was perfectly willing to talk to me as a researcher uh, about his experiences as long as I didn't disclose his name, and I won't. But at the same time, he had a privacy rule that he was not going to disclose this information to his partner. If you think about the different categories of information that we hold and believe to be private, you probably will realize that you have different privacy rules about who gets access to what information. Your health information probably can go to some people, but not to others. Uh, Information about your values or belief systems, maybe things that you share with some people, but not with others. Um, Information that you hold about your relationships. Um, may be things that you share with some people and not with others. And maybe information that you don't share at all. You may have privacy rules that forbid you to disclose any of that information. Um, I'm reminded of my wedding day when the woman who served as my youth group leader in church approached me after the wedding and said, well, it gave me a piece of advice that has stuck with me to this day, and next year will be 20 years ago. She said that Tamara and I were bound to disagree on some things, and we were bound to get upset with each other about some things. But the one thing she said we should never do is get on the phone and call our parents and tell them about what's going on. What she was doing was, in essence, suggesting that we adopt a privacy rule that whatever conflicts we were engaged in with each other stay between us. And you can think what you will of that advice. I think it has been pretty useful for me over the past 19 and a half years. Now, so we know that people tend to believe that they have a right to control their private information. And the way they do that is through establishing privacy rules. And those rules differ from person to person. The rules about what I can disclose to my brother may be different than the rules about what I would disclose to my mother. Now, when we choose to disclose a piece of information to someone, per the theory, those people become co-owners of that information. And that carries with it an interesting responsibility because we often assume that those people have the same privacy rules that we do and that they wouldn't go and disclose that information to people that we wouldn't disclose it to. But that is not always the case for lots of reasons. We can't read each other's minds and assume that we are all abiding by the same privacy rules. And to be honest, far too often people are not explicit about those privacy rules. People are more likely to just disclose than to say, look, I need to tell you something or I want to tell you something, but I'm asking you not to tell this to another person. People don't do that, and well, here's what happens. When a co-owner of that information discloses that information in a way that violates your privacy rules, what we experience is relational turbulence. That person has violated a trust, and we see boundary turbulence emerge as a result. Now you're not as comfortable trusting that person with information anymore. And so your boundary rules, your privacy rules vis-a-vis that person likely will change. And taken to an extreme, the relationship itself changes. You become less trusting of that person. You may even decide that that person's not a person you want a relationship with anymore. Now, what we're talking about here is the disclosure of private information, and we need to make a distinction here. Some people misidentify privacy management theory as a theory about self-disclosure. And self-disclosure can be part of the private information we disclose, but it's not all of it. So let's be clear that that privacy is simply information that we have access to that other people don't. That can be information about ourselves, or it can be information about others. So the distinction between private information and self-disclosure is one that's worth keeping in mind. So privacy management theory is, in a sense, bigger than self-disclosure. So what do people have to say about privacy management theory? Well, we've talked about what makes for good theory, whether it's good scientific theory or good interpretive theory. Well, privacy management posits itself as an interpretive theory, and it tends to match the guidelines for good interpretive theory. It elucidates understanding. It has designs on values of justice and fairness. It's a theory that sets out to make the world a better place. If anything, the one shortcoming about it from the perspective of an interpretive researcher is that it doesn't have the same kind of artistic or aesthetic appeal that we expect from that we expect from the best interpretive theories. It helps us understand people, though. It's backed up by sound qualitative research. The theory was developed in the maybe 1990s, but has been supported by research ever since. It clarifies what we mean when we talk about privacy, and I argue that it does call for reform. It calls for an understanding of what we define as private, or at the very least, it calls for us to be more forthright in expressing our privacy rules to each other. Now, one weakness of the theory is that Petronio doesn't really talk us through the process of dealing with boundary turbulence. She simply lets us know that when people violate our privacy rules, boundary turbulence results. But how do we deal with that? Is there a process of reconciliation? Are there some privacy violations that are simply deal breakers, relationship enders? There's more research that needs to be done there to differentiate in terms of the quality and the quantity of those violations. But in, gosh, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 decades plus working with this theory, she has acknowledged that there are some ambiguities there, and she is in the process of repackaging, reconceptualizing the theory. That's what we do when building theory. These aren't laws, these are theories. Hence, they can be tested and disproven, and they can be tested, and we can find shortcomings in them, and then we have to go back and address those shortcomings. Privacy management theory helps us to understand why people share the information that they share with each other and why they withhold information. And as a consequence, it also provides us some insight about the consequences of violating the privacy rules and boundaries that we set in relationships.